Greetings to all my tech heads out there in the KevTechify Nation, and if you're new here, welcome. In this episode, we're going to look at the default route propagation. We'll be discussing propagating a default static route in OSPF version 2 and verifying that propagated default route. This episode is part of my series on enterprise networking, security, and automation. I'm Kevin here at KevTechify. Let's get this adventure started. We can use OSPF to propagate our default routes to all of our OSPF enabled routers. Instead of having to go to each router and manually say, this is our designated router, what we can do is we can use OSPF to propagate that to all the OSPF routers in our area. To do that, we have to define that static route. And once again, to define that static route for a default route is we use IP route, and then we put in quad zeros, meaning we'll match any network, subnet mask of quad zeros again, so 2 quad zeros, matching any address that we have, and then we either put in the next hop address or the exit interface. Then, once we have that default route in there, we go and specify the default information originate. That instructs the router to be the source for the default route information and propagate that default static route in OSPF updates. Here we are on R2. On R2, we went in there, we set our loopback interface of 1. That was our simulated connection to the internet. That was off of that top router in our diagram where it went off to the internet. So that simulates our internet connection here. We went and we go ahead and we set an IP address so that way we have something to route to. Then we created our static route, IP route, with 2 quad zeros saying, if I process every route in my routing table, I don't have a match, we are going to use this as my default route, our gateway of last resort. So 2 quad zeros. And then what interface am I going to use? Because we're using a loopback interface, we'll go ahead and specify this as my exit interface, loopback 1. That's where we just created that IP address. We get a warning, we can ignore that. And then we come into our routing protocols. Once again, we are still on router 2, the one where we have that directly connected connection to our simulated internet. So we can go in and get into the configuration of our routing protocol of OSPF with a process ID of 10. In there, we can say default information originate. And once again, that instructs this router, R2, to be the source of the default route information and then to propagate that default route in OSPF updates. To verify that the propagated route has been there, we can do a show IP route, and we are on R2 here. Begin with the filter beginning on the gateway, and it says gateway of last resort is 000 to network 00. And then here's our static route that says we are directly connected to loopback 1. That's what we just configured. So we can verify it on R2. Now let's go on to R1 and see that it has been propagated through OSPF. So we are on R1 right here. We do a show IP route filtering with the beginning of gateway. Then we're saying the gateway of last resort is 10.1.1.6. 10.1.1.6 is on that R2 where that simulated internet is, and that's to network 000. We are going to take anything and push it there. Then we come down here, we have a routing entry. We've learned this through OSPF. That's what this code means right here. And then we have the asterisk here, meaning this is the candidate for our default route, saying we're going to match anything and everything. We learned this through OSPF. We have the default loop. We have the default cost metric of 1. via this entry out our port of gig 00. So we have now propagated that through OSPF from R2 onto R1, our default route. It was my pleasure to provide you with this wonderful episode on default route propagation. If you like this episode and if you got value out of it, and of course, depending upon what platform you're liking, please click that like button, give a 5-star rating, leave a comment. This all helps me bring you more great content. Please take a minute to subscribe to my channel. All my socials and contact information are on my website, KevTechify.com, and you can get all these episodes in video and podcast form. In the upper right is my playlist for my series on enterprise networking, security, and automation. In the bottom right is one of my favorite videos I have listed just for you. Thank you so much for watching this episode of my series on enterprise networking, security, and automation. Once again, I'm Kevin. This is KevTechify. I'll see you next time for another great adventure.